This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nisha, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's video, I'm going to be looking at plants. Zendikar Rising features a new powerful legendary creature who makes plant tokens in Phylath, World Sculptor, and that got me to wondering about the best plants in the history of the game. To be eligible for this list, a card had to either have the plant creature type or be capable of making plant creature tokens. In all, there were 57 cards that were eligible for this list, and in this video I'm going to talk about the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, or Mythic Invitational top 8, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. Alright, let's start with number 10. At number 10 it is Joty Offshoot, a plant with Defender. This list will actually feature a few plants with Defender, and that makes sense because lots of plants are sort of just inanimate things that happen to be living. Don't let that fool you though, because there's some pretty sweet Defender plants out there, and Joty Offshoot is one of them. Gaining 1 life at a time when your lands enter the battlefield may not sound like much, but given that it's a 1-drop with reasonable defensive stats, the Offshoot goes a long way towards making it harder for aggressive opponents to kill you quickly. This was a great 1-drop for ramp decks while the Offshoot was in Standard, because they wanted to get to the later part of the game after casting some ramp spells, and those ramp spells end up netting you extra life with the Offshoot around. One of the dangers of ramp strategies is that you often spend early turns tapping out for something like Explosive Vegetation, giving your opponent the chance to continue to get ahead of you on the board while also lowering your life. But by adding some incidental life gain to all your ramp spells, you can end up making sure you make it to the late game thanks to all that life. The Offshoot doesn't have any points since it rotated out of Standard, so its position on this list may be in jeopardy, with the new plants being printed in Zendikar Rising. At number 9 it is Vinelasher Kudzu, which like the Offshoot has 4 points, but I gave it the edge because it has more Pro Tour top 8s. This is a card that I have fond memories of because when I was doing a Ravnica Seal deck back in the day, I was lucky enough to get the Kudzu, and it seemed like I played it on turn 2 just about every game, and if you can do that, you're going to be in pretty great shape, as this little 2-drop just keeps on growing. The Kudzu had 1 top 8 each in Ravnica block constructed in Standard, with the former coming in Heartbeat of Spring ramp decks, and the latter coming in a Sultai control deck. At number 8, it is Avenger of Zendikar, which you may notice bears more than a passing resemblance to Phylath, World Sculptor. Both of them make a bunch of plant tokens when they come down, and both of them have a landfall effect that makes plants bigger. Note, by the way, that these count all plants, not just the plant tokens, so all the cards on this list would benefit from either of these creatures' landfall abilities because they're basically tribal plant payoffs. The Avenger makes all of your plants a little bigger, while Phylath makes 1 plant a lot bigger. The Avenger also counts all lands, while Phylath only counts non-basic lands, and of course Phylath is 2 colors in Legendary and costs 1 less mana. If Avenger of Zendikar is any indication, Phylath is going to find at least some success. This is because a creature who comes down and impacts the board immediately is a great thing, and sure, the 0-1 plant tokens aren't the most impressive thing ever, but it does impact the board right away, and this becomes even more pronounced if you happen to play a land on the same turn, making those plants a real threat. Left unchecked, Avenger of Zendikar makes a pretty scary plant army. While in Standard, the Avenger was a great fit for ramp decks because it was expensive, and loved it when you put multiple lands into play on the same turn. It also has 1 point from an extended Scapeshift deck. At number 7, it is Colony Garden. Like a lot of non-basic lands that produce colored mana, Colony Garden comes into play tapped. While that is obviously a downside, the Garden provides you with some extra value to make up for that, a 0-1 plant token. Now, that's not the most exciting thing in the world to do, but you can sort of think of it as a 0-mana 0-1 plant that gives you a land on the following turn, and when you put it like that, it seems pretty solid. It is especially useful in decks trying to stave off aggressive starts from opponents, in particular, decks that can win the game quickly if only they had 1 more turn. And Colony Garden often gives you that turn. It has gained its points in both Standard and Modern in decks featuring Primeval Titan. Those decks can usually assemble lands that allow them to win the game in a swing or two, but if you've taken too many hits in the early game, your Titan can search up a Colony Garden, or even 2, if you need to get to that next turn. It is even better in modern Amulet Titan decks because Amulet of Vigor even lets you get around the downside since the garden will come into play untapped. Colony Garden also has 2 points in Legacy, where it's used in Legacy lands, a deck which also runs multiple ways to tutor up lands, including the garden, when necessary. At number 6, it is Genesis Hydra. So far, most of the plants we've looked at have had very little power to start with, and they haven't been the most imposing creatures without some help. That all changes with Genesis Hydra, which is a plant Hydra. Genesis Hydra is a cool card and a really great place to sink a bunch of mana. It gives you a massive creature and a Genesis Wave effect that has a good chance of putting something else into play for free, depending on how much mana you spend on it. 2 cards for the price of 1 is always great, and that's what you're going to get here. The good news for Genesis Hydra is that it existed in a standard where Devotion was one of the best things you can do, in no small part thanks to Nykthos, Shrine of Nyx. That land could really make sure you ended up with a ton of mana that allowed you to cast a huge Genesis Hydra. Genesis Hydra was one of the best reasons to go the green Devotion route, and it found considerable success while in Standard. At number 5, it is Wall of Blossoms, another 0-power plant, as well as another plant with Defender. Wall of Blossoms doesn't do anything fancy, just has high toughness and draws you a card, but it turns out all of that for 2 mana is a good deal. The Wall's body helps you live long enough to take advantage of any card advantage you might gain. In Standard, it was played in the recurring survival combo deck where it could help you draw your combo pieces and give you the time to draw them. It was also played in a variety of decks in Extended, including black-green midrange, and various combo decks, including Aluren and Life. At number 4, it is Tree of Redemption, a tree with a massive 13 toughness, and that matters because not only can it block well, it can exchange your life total for its toughness. The idea there being that it's going to gain you a ton of life. The tree was played in a lot of block and standard sideboards where it was particularly effective against aggro decks, between being really hard to chop down and being able to gain you a ton of life when you needed it to. It was a fairly heavily played card in both formats, with even aggro decks running it to bring in against the mirror. At number 3, we have Nisha, Voice of Zendikar, a planeswalker who makes plant tokens. At only 3 mana, Nisha can really take over games. The plants can be used to protect her, and once you go wide enough, she can use her -2 to pump your whole board. In Standard, the decks that ran her were generally very capable of going wide on their own, so sometimes you could just play her and -2 her right away to make your whole board imposing. In Standard, she was played in decks like Green-White Tokens and the +1/+1 counter-focused Golgari Constrictor deck. She doesn't quite have any top 8s in Modern, but she does have several top 16s, generally in +1/+1 counter-focused decks like Hardened Scales. That deck has mostly shifted towards being an artifact deck lately, so Nisha doesn't really have a home in Modern right now. However, I do think she is powerful enough to get some points in that format, or Pioneer, at some point. She just hasn't done it yet. As of now, all of her points are in Standard, and she hasn't gained any since 2017. At number 2, it is Wall of Roots, a wall that can ramp you. It's a pretty nice card because it can help you live long enough to take advantage of that extra mana, and it also makes you that extra mana. It was played both times it was in Standard, in ramp decks, as you would expect. It was played in a variety of extended decks, including Life from the Loam and the Rock. It also has a single point in Legacy from back in 2005, where it was played in a recurring survival deck. Modern is where it has found the most success, though. It was played in most versions of Birthing Pod, a toolbox deck that also ran some easy-to-assemble combos, and the Wall of Roots was nice for the deck because it could help you get online with your pods sooner, and then you could sacrifice the wall to the pod once its usefulness was used up. Birthing Pod was eventually banned in Modern, but Wall of Roots has continued to see play in its spiritual successor, which is a toolbox deck that runs Collected Company and Court of Calling instead of Birthing Pod. And at number 1, it's Sylvan Cariatid, a plant that can both fix mana and ramp you. One of the annoying things about playing mana creatures is that they're often small and vulnerable, and your opponent can really slow you down by blowing up your creature. But the Cariatid gets around that problem by adding hexproof, which means you're all but certain to get to reap its benefits over the course of the game, and speeding up your game by a whole turn is a pretty big deal. The Cariatid was basically a staple in green decks in both block and standard, and it also has a single point from a modern Jeskai Ascendancy deck, and more recently, it picked up a couple points in Pioneer, where it was featured in a Niv Mizzet Reborn deck. The Cariatid is likely to continue to put up points going forward in Pioneer. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe, and if If you want to catch up on the more than 300 other MTG top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.